Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, freaks and geeks, children of all ages. Welcome back to another episode of the Creepypasta Power Hour. I'm your host, Midnight Sinclair, and today's story is Snow on Mount Silver. Turn the lights down and the volume up as we get into some creepy gaming. So, my brother and I, we kind of grew up on Pokemon. Around here, a lot of kids did. It worked perfectly for us, too. Every time a new gen came out, one of us would get one version, one of us would get the other, and since our mom liked to spoil us, we both got the third one. This is going to sound at first like a bittersweet story about two siblings growing up with a couple of games that eventually take them down two different roads. Well, it's a little more than that. The years rolled by, we kept collecting, Game Boys got old, we replaced them, cartridges gave out, we picked up new copies, but we started down two completely different roads before Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald came out. See, around then my brother got a Game Shark. We heard all the hacks and cheats you could do with them, even if we were kind of late to the party, and they sounded awfully cool. Our first guinea pig was my brother's old blue version. We just dicked around with it a little bit, nothing major, but whatever we did fucked the cartridge up. After a couple of code entries, it glitched out and became unplayable. Naturally, we were upset at first. My brother mourned the loss of his hours of work, and I was sympathetic. I told him, "It's okay, we can replace it. The stupid shark was a waste of money." But here our paths finally differed. After seeing the mess that it had turned blue into, I had become opposed to the idea of hacking and cheating in any of my games. What can I say? I'm a chick. I feel feelings for the little pixel critters. At least with that Game Shark. But my brother had taken this game's destruction as a personal challenge or something. I don't think he ever played a game after that which wasn't hacked somehow. Yeah, we played a shit ton of Pokemon, man, but for us, there really wasn't much else to do. We live out in the country without many other kids. The farmers didn't want us on their property, so we played Pokemon out on the lawn all day, every day. It was pretty awesome to us. At least, we lost the Game Shark when our rooms got moved. A new addition was built onto our house, and it disappeared in the mess of shit that got stuffed into the new closet. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald finally arrived. After playing through them once, we were both in agreement that they were definitely lacking in comparison to the last gen. We both tried an honest playthrough, and though we managed to finish, it left us both yearning for some good old-fashioned nostalgia. Where were our gold, silver, and crystal cartridges, though? It took us about a month to dig through the boxes. We'd been too lazy to open them up before, but we finally found one, full of a shitload of our old electronics. My purple Game Boy Color still worked, his red one could no longer hold batteries in place. Both of our GBAs were fine, though along with our snake lights and link cables, that one with the nifty little connector in the middle that I had always wrapped up oh so carefully to avoid fraying the wires and condemning it to the trash like our last cable. We both grabbed up everything we could. It was nice to have Yellow, which had been my first and most cherished game of any series, not just Pokemon, and Red and Gold back. We went through the motions of checking our old files, taking in all the memories, and eventually we figured the Gen 1 stuff was just too nostalgic to get rid of. I restarted Gold, he restarted Silver. He snatched the Game Shark out of the box and slipped it into the back of his GBA. I shook my head at him. I remember what I said to him. "That thing will kill your game, you know." He never liked me preaching about abusing pixels, so I shut my mouth after that, but it put him off from playing with me. I guess it was just one time too many or something. I ought to know when to keep my thoughts to myself, really. It was a couple of days later that it happened. I was out on the porch, Game Boy in hand, just about to go into the Elite Four when I realized I needed a little help. My team was ill-balanced thanks to playing through for leisure, and at the time I was no great trainer that could pull off gimmick runs. I knew that my brother had been 2 badges ahead of me when we'd last checked with one another, so I was hoping maybe he'd let me borrow a Pokemon or two for this run-through. Now the thing is, I'd spent the last 24 hours at a friend's house. I had literally come home, dumped my bag in my room, and crept out into the sun to play my GBA. I had no idea what he'd been up to. For all I knew, he was done with the game onto a new one, which I figured was all the better for me, since he wouldn't need those Pokemon, and I'd stand a better chance at nicking a few. So I got up, went into the house, and when I went to the living room, I noticed all his Pokemon games lying on the floor. Some of the cartridges had been mangled, like they'd been hacked at with something sharp. Even his old blue version, long ago dead and too sentimental to throw away, was lying with the plastic cut ragged, split almost halfway up one side, completely unusable anymore, even if it would have worked. I was a little scared. This had to have happened this morning. Otherwise, our mom would have seen, and they wouldn't be lying on the carpet. Tucking my GBA into my pocket, I crept over to his room and found the door unlocked. Somehow that was even more concerning. I walked in and found my brother sitting on the edge of his bed. GBA was in pieces on the floor at his feet, smashed to bits. Next to him on the bed were a hammer and our mother's gardening scissors. His face was paler than I'd ever seen, even whiter than the time we'd gone corning, and the old guy up the street, legally blind and a raving nutcase, chased us off with a shotgun. It was now I noticed the Game Shark on the ground, and a silver cartridge poking from under his bed. Somehow they had been spared the wrath of the hammer. "Are you okay?" I asked. I remember the chills that ran through me. He was my little brother. Seeing him like this was horrifying. It was awful. I remember him rasping. The way his voice rattled made my knees weak. Oh God, white everywhere and then black. I remember running over and hugging him, and I remember his limp arm brushed my Game Boy in my pocket, and his sudden scream right in my ear, making me jump and bite my tongue by accident. He ripped the handheld from my pocket and hurled it at the far wall. I cried out at the dent the plastic system made there, running over to collect it. The screen had gone dark, and though I feared the worst, when I flicked the switch it powered up normally. I waited there in the corner trying to pretend the GBA mattered enough not to go and run for our mom. The volume was on. The Pokemon theme started up, and he screamed again, picking up the hammer. This time I screamed too and ran into the room with my GBA clutched to my chest like a shield. He ended up in the psych ward hospital for 2 days. When we went to visit him, I left my GBA at home. No one could figure out what had set off this strange manic behavior. There was some talk that I didn't understand at the time about some disorder he may or may not have had. But even though my mom and I had collected and brought in all the cut-up cartridges to be looked at, Mom's idea, not mine, no one had thought it to tie it back to the game. Maybe that was my fault. I hadn't said a word about what had happened when he had accidentally touched my gameplay, or the blind white terror he'd been thrown into when he heard the music. On my last visit to the hospital before school on the second day, I was left alone in the room with him while my mom had some private talk with the doctor, talking about precautions to take if this happens again. I sat in a chair next to him when he was staring at the ceiling, but he suddenly sat up, making me flinch. "Hey," he told me, "Angie, go in my room when you get home." I didn't understand what he meant, and then I remembered the things we hadn't packed up and brought in, the game and the hacking tool under his bed. "Get rid of them. I don't ever want to play with them again." His voice was weary and desperate. He sounded like an old man on his deathbed. My poor damaged little brother. How could I refuse? "Promise you will get rid of them." "Okay, I promise." I was carted off to school late, and though the whole day I only had my promise to him in my head, I didn't know it at the time, but this would be the last time I could ever play the big sister role and help him out. I just had to get home and get rid of that game. But as the day went on, a sick curiosity started to go through my own head. What could possibly have happened to that game that scared him so badly? I was scared myself, but I just had to know. I had to know. I got home and went into his room, bent on uncovering whatever horror was awaiting for me. Mom since vacuumed the room, and the cartridge and the Game Shark were no longer visible. I got down and crawled halfway under the bed, feeling timid but holding on to the promise I made as a badge of courage. Under the bed there was enough dust to make me cough, enough old Legos and various other toys that I couldn't set my elbow down without landing it on something. But finally I saw both objects. They'd been shoved to the corner on top of the notebook that looked too new to have been down here long. Unthinking, I grabbed the corner of the page and dragged everything out with me, still wheezing from the dust, allergies and all. They looked innocent, simple toys, and a simple spiral-bound bunch of papers. When I sat silver version on the Game Shark on the floor, I took a close look at the notebook. On it were scrawled 20 different cheat codes, but one had been scrawled over with Sharpie where it had initially been drawn in pen. This was confusing. He really tried to erase it out. The marker had been pressed on the paper so hard that the ink soaked through most of the pages and almost 2/3 of the way of the cardstock back cover. But pen has a way of sticking around. I picked up the notebook and tilted it backward in the light. The reflective surface of the Sharpie revealed the indents that had been left where he'd written. The code was an unintelligible mess of letters and numbers, but the words next to it confused me. Easter egg, snow on Mount Silver. I remembered what he had said when I found him. He'd been raving about white and then black. Could he mean snow? Even though it was only August and the temperature was climbing up to 90 degrees every day, a chill ran down my spine. Did I dare? I picked up everything and brought it to my room, lay down the carpet in front of me with my own GBA next to it. For a long time I just stared down to it. The longer I looked, the more maniacal Lugia's face on the sticker became. Like some twisted grin, like it was daring me to find out what happened to my brother. I was a 14-year-old kid. Did I really want to tempt fate and risk ending up like him? I glared down at Lugia a bit longer. I had to see. I slid gold out of my GBA and stuck silver in its place. It took me almost 15 minutes to compose myself and turn it on. It started normally. I left the sound on low, too afraid of what I might hear to keep it up all the way, too curious to keep it turned off. The title screen was normal, Lugia again, but somehow menacing, despite my common sense telling me it was the exact same picture as every other time I had started up the game. How bad could this be, I asked myself. His notes said Easter egg. Didn't that mean that was coding already in the game? The menu came up, still absolutely normal. His character was Blake, with a mostly filled Pokédex, but the time was odd. 99999. I knew he couldn't have been playing for that long. I had barely logged 50 hours on my own game, and I was at the Elite Four. I was playing slowly, probably the result of his hacking fucking up his file. Well, whatever then. The game started up, and the first thing I noticed was the prolonged black screen. It took almost a minute for anything to change. There was no sound at all. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up already, but it was too late to turn back. Finally, a very dim sort of map came onto the screen, but it looked like static. What was going on? I squinted down and realized with a fearsome pang it was actually the Mount Silver map. But what I thought was static was heavy falling snow. So this is where he last saved his game. I checked his party, a very normal team for someone who'd been using a Game Shark. Typhlosion, Feraligatr, Meganium, Pidgeot, Tyranitar, Lugia, all level 100 with modded moves, typical for him. Something about the sprites was strange though. They seemed sullen in a way, their colors washed out and their expression lacking the usual vigor they normally had. I chalked this up to missing pixels or something, also due to the hacking. The map had brightened up a smidgen when I closed the start menu. Indeed, snow was somehow falling very heavily. Pixels danced across the screen so fast. It was hard to see the little sprite that was my little brother's character. Something was off about him too. When I checked the information, it was the same as the Pokemon sprites. The colors were dull. In fact, now I thought about it, he almost looked frostbitten. My stomach tightened, and I turned and tried to move back down the mountain. As I hit the bottom of the screen, words popped up, and there was finally a sound, my sprite hitting an invisible wall. I can't turn back now. That was unsettling. I went into my Pokemon and tried to use Pidgeot's fly ability. I can't fly in this, obviously referring to the snow. Fuck it. I thought about going into his bag. There was an escape rope. I tried using it. I can't go back anymore. What was going on? Once again, I tried to walk down the mountain. And to my horror, the words changed with every attempt. I can't run away. I can't go back down. I can never go back. The last one sent a frigid feeling through my heart. There's no way down the mountain. I had to climb. Turning the little sprite around, I moved him forward. No resistance at all. My walking speed was oddly slow. What was truly weird was the lack of grass and trainers of anything at all, but without white snow, which still blew across the screen and made it impossible to see. As I moved further up the mountain, his walking speed became slower and slower. The static of curtains of pixels grew thicker, so that I could barely make out the features of the map, but it seemed the only way to move was straight ahead anyway. I reached what was the set of stairs at the very edge of the screen. I didn't remember this being here before. As I tried to move up, the little sprite paused. I'm cold. By now, I was getting goosebumps. His walking speed had become painfully slow, as if he was being impeded up the little staircase. More text on screen. Meganium has died. What the fuck? Pokemon don't die in these games. I checked in my party. I was frightened and confused by what I saw. Meganium's sprite had been replaced by a red X. All of my Pokemon spurred varying degrees of damage, though I hadn't battled once. I went into the bag and found a single revived. Tried to use it. It's too late. What kind of Easter egg was this? There wasn't much else I could do. Tried turning around. Yielded the same messages as before, so I kept moving. Pidgeot has died. I checked again, and sure enough, there was a little red X. This time I selected it and looked at the Pokemon itself, trying to figure out what was wrong. I wish I hadn't. The sprite was mangled. What was left was splotched with a sickish bluish gray color. Its eye was a solid black pit. I flipped back down to Meganium. Same deal. A leg missing, a chunk of its neck, most of its head, save that pitch black dead eye. Morbid curiosity urged me onward, and the path never deviated from straight upward. Along the way, every now and then, another party member would die. An examination of its sprite would show the same condition as the other, until all that was left was Typhlosion. One more staircase was up ahead. I climbed it, braced for whatever horror awaited me. I hit the summit. It was deserted. Red was nowhere to be found. The snow stopped falling. In the very center of the map was something sticking out of the snow. It looked like a Pokeball. Okay, maybe all this creepy shit led up to some final battle using whatever was in there. If I picked it up, maybe Red would come out of hiding. I walked over and examined it. There's a burst of static that made me jump. What appeared on the screen was a battle animation. My trainer sprite appearing, his skin tinged blue, against another mangled Pokemon sprite. It was Celebi. In the center of the screen of that black hole was its eye. A single red dot burned out like an ember. The thing looked rotted. It didn't even throw out my mostly dead Typhlosion before it had moved. Celebi used Perish Song. A screech came out of my GBA, and I almost dropped it as the screen went white. A part of me was relieved, thinking my final Pokemon had been KO'd and I would be transported to a Pokemon Center, but I was wrong. My sprite reappeared in what looked like a cave. Was I now inside the mountain? I checked my trainer card and felt sick. The sprite was just as mauled as the Pokemon had been. A leg gone, a single eye remaining, pitch black and so sad looking. Tears welled up at the corner, and every color on him was replaced with those 6 shades of frosty blue and gray. Every stat on the card was reduced to 0, except the time, which still read 9999. His sprite there mimicked the horror that had become of the one on the trainer card. Pieces were missing, everything was discolored. I started to walk, and at first I received a message. It's so cold. There is only one direction to go, upward, and every now and then would be stopped by a message that made my heart sink lower and lower. Mother, it feels so cold. It feels so cold. I can't go on. The walls as I walked became darker and darker until they were pitch black at the end. There was an exit there, marked only by a white outline. I had no choice but to go through it. It opened up into a chamber that was also solid white. Only way to distinguish the walls were a thin gray line that marked them separate from the floor. I walked against the far wall, and there was another sprite, Red's in fact, intact. I had come this far. I had to finish this. I walked up to him and hit A. A battle started. The red sprite had none of the deformities that marred my own. The colors were the same, blues and grays, but he was intact. He just looked extremely sad. His first Pokemon came out, Venusaur. It was just like my own had been, but level 0 with a speck of health. I sent out Typhlosion, who had just 6 hit points left. No Pokemon made a sound when they were brought into battle. Venusaur used Struggle. There was no animation, just a single point of damage done to Typhlosion, then the opposing sprite dropped off the screen. Venusaur has died. There's no text asking me to switch out. Instead, there is a box, which I took as dialogue from Red. ... His next Pokemon was a Blastoise, even more mangled than Venusaur had been. It struggled and died. After each round, there was an ominous ... from the trainer. Every sprite was more damaged than the last. His Espeon was barely distinguishable as a Pokemon. I realized that he was sending them out of order, which saved one Pokemon for last. Pikachu came out, and it was grotesque. It too was discolored, like it was frostbitten. It was missing an ear and half of its body and tail. Its head was mostly intact, but its eyes were much larger than it should have been. It glared out at me like a pitch-black windows to hell. But the thing that got me was the giant smile that extended almost all the way to the edges of its head. Its health was somewhat at 0. At least it looked that way. My hands were shaking. I didn't get a chance to attack. Pikachu used Pain Split. Pikachu has died. Typhlosion has died. It cut back to the image of Red Sprite. Now it looked like mine, with his body so butchered it looked like a carcass stripped of most of its meat, except it had those same soulless, deranged eyes as Pikachu. I understood what happened. They were dead, and this was the sublevel of the mountain, was the hell they now existed. Red finally spoke. It's over. The screen flashed black and white for a moment. Used Destiny Bond. A horrible, hideous screeching started to issue from my GBA. The screen went white and it shrieked at me. I threw it at the floor and pressed my back against the bed. The horrible noise continued for several long moments, while the screen stayed white, then black, then there was silence. It took me a few long moments, but I eventually stood up, took the Game Shark, I took the notebook, and that fucked up copy of Pokemon. I picked them all up and carried them to the garbage can we had already set out for morning pickup. At the end of our long, winding driveway, I threw them in. When I got back to the house, I didn't know what to do. I picked up yellow version and inserted it into my Game Boy. I think it was a part of me that was determined to make sure I hadn't been tainted as well. The music started up, the game played. I turned to my Pikachu and hit A. Its smiling face greeted me with an ear twitch and a big pixelated smile, a pleasant, normal smile. I turned my game off and spent the next hour crying on the floor. My brother and I never did play Pokemon together again. He gave it up for good. I stuck to replaying my comforting, unhacked games. That winter the snow fell thick. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Easter Egg, Snow on Mount Silver. I hope you enjoyed it as much as me. While it is pretty cliche with all the horror and everything, I thought it was quite nice. The main things that detract from the story is talking about how grotesque the player character in Red looked, and I think it shows because the author didn't provide a sprite for Red or Silver. It just sounds too detailed to play on a Game Boy cartridge. But aside from that, it's pretty well written, all things considered. I think there are bits that dragged on too much. It felt like they could have gotten to the point faster. I mean, this is a 20-minute recording. I think that goes to show what I'm talking about. Probably my favorite aspect of this is the PNGs that were provided on the Creepypasta wiki. It shows the Maginium, the Pidgeot, and Red's Pikachu, and how they look compared to how they're supposed to look. I think it's interesting. Aside from that, I hope you enjoyed my narration. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz, and I hope you sleep well tonight.